Ruben Amorim has been Manchester United manager for 3 months now, but things aren't going that well. So today I'm joined by John Mackenzie and Dr. Mark Carey to ask the question, is it possible to judge him yet? And if so, how? So how do we judge Ruben Amorim?
Well, it's been long enough now, I think, that we can start digging into the data and start looking for areas where there might be differences between Ruben Amorim and his predecessor, Erik ten Hag. Got the top line numbers here, courtesy of Dr. Mark Carey. Not often that I can say that, and he sat right opposite me, but here we are. This is just the overview stuff. So I think the big picture takeaways here are, in terms of the underlying numbers, when it comes to going forward, Manchester United slightly better under Erik ten Hag. So you can see expected goals, he's got the higher value out of the two of them. More shots, higher XG per shot just. And so you can see that the underlying numbers suggest under Erik ten Hag, Manchester United slightly better at attacking. However, on the flip side, Manchester United now slightly better at defending under Ruben Amorim. So you can see slightly better numbers in terms of XG conceded. Shots conceded are a little bit lower, and also the XG per shot is slightly lower as well. So yeah, what we've basically seen is Manchester United have gone from a slightly better attacking manager to a slightly better defensive manager.
And these are slight though, aren't they? These slight differences.
I was going to say, these numbers are super small. So even though I've tried to distinguish by sort of highlighting which one's higher or lower, there's actually really not much between it. And you look at the possession as well, thinking that Ruben Amorim is more of a possession dominant manager. There's really a percentage and a half difference between the two, so not a huge amount.
Okay.
It's also worth noting as well that the differences between the goals and the XG is kind of evened itself out, but it's still kind of a grey area. So you look at Erik ten Hag, you look at the XG and the goals, they're heavily underperforming from a goals perspective going forward, but we're actually overperforming from a defensive perspective. But it's kind of more accurate now with XG and goals under Ruben Amorim in both boxes, but it's still pretty average compared to, I suppose, the rest of the league. And I looked at it in terms of the expected goal difference as a good proxy of where a team should be in the league. And Man United across the whole season are still 13th by expected goal difference. So even average it out across both managers, they're not exactly in a false position in this season.
Okay, I mean, we probably could tell most of that from the eye test because they do keep losing games and playing badly, don't they? But let's go a little deeper.
Yeah, let's do that, and you'll see that it's actually quite hard to spot any real differences here. Let's start with build-up success, because I think that's an area where Erik ten Hag was often criticised. So what I've got here is build-up success. This is data from Photo Vision, and what it's looking for essentially is any moment where you're starting out in deep build-up moments and then moving into more progressive phases. So it could be settle possession further up the pitch, could be final third creation stuff. It could even be just having a really direct attack and it ending with a shot. So this will give us a good idea of whether or not actually the efficiency of Manchester United's build-up has improved at all. So each one of these bars represents basically just the build-up success for Manchester United in each of those games. This is where Ruben Amorim comes in, and remember there's a couple of games before Amorim comes in where we've got Van Nistelrooy as the interim manager. Yeah. So this is basically ten Hag, and then we've got Amorim here. And actually what you can see from this is that often there's not really a huge amount of improvement across most of these fixtures. So we can take, for example, Fulham here. This is under ten Hag, 54.8% build-up success, which is a bit better than what's going on with when Ruben Amorim, his team, play Fulham later on. But then if we look at Brighton and Hove Albion, we can see slightly less success compared to the equal fixture later on in the season.
Who's the biggest one in the middle there? Amorim's fourth.
This one here.
Yeah.
This is Nottingham Forest.
Oh.
Yeah. That's partly because Nottingham Forest aren't a particularly high pressing side, so you're going to have a fair amount of build up success against them.
A bit of fluff just landed in your head. Yeah, he's got it.
But actually, if we take all of these figures and then work out per period what the average success is, we'll see that those figures are pretty close. So there's about 4 percentage points in it here. So Manchester United slightly more efficient, I would say, in build-up under ten Hag than they were under Ruben Amorim, which I think is kind of interesting because I think a lot of people, their gut sense was that actually build-up had probably slightly improved under Amorim. We'll talk about why that is in a moment. But before we do, I've got another viz to show you, in terms of what's happened in terms of the build-up tendencies under these two managers.
What's going on here, John?
Yeah, this is a complicated graph. So each one of these is an individual game. On the x-axis here, what we've got is percentage of time spent in build-up. So if the game is over on this side, it means that you've basically got more percentage of your time spent in build-up. So these are higher build-up games. And then the y-axis is whether or not that build-up is successful. So this is like the height of those bars that we've just had. The games that are circled in yellow are games under Ruben Amorim. There's 2 purple games here, that's Ruud van Nistelrooy, and then the other games uncircled are the Ten Hag games. And the Ten Hag games are actually quite interesting because if you look at them, the majority of them in terms of build-up success are around this 40% mark. So Erik Ten Hag getting relatively consistent, I would say, levels of build-up success relative to the average for the season. What we get from Ruben Amorim is that there's obviously quite a big spread here, but I think what's really interesting to me is this area over here, this cluster of 7 games.
They're clustered, John.
They are clustered, and these games are games where they've got more percentage of time spent in build-up, so they're doing a lot of build-up, but the success of that build-up is not actually going over the line of the average success over the course of the season.
Okay, so they have the ball more, but it's bad more.
Well, it's not as successful, it's not as efficient in the build-up.
Is there an extent to which, as well, the opposition are comfortable allowing Manchester United to build up under Amorim, knowing that they actually haven't got a huge threat when they do progress it into either the middle third or the final third?
Yeah, and I think this is why a lot of people think that the build-up has maybe improved, because what we're seeing is more time on the ball. And I think when people see that you've got more time on the ball, you think, well, your build-up must be better, right? Because if you've got the ball, you're building up. But actually, I think I've got a nice example from the Liverpool game recently to show how teams are both happy to allow Manchester United to have the ball and actually how inefficient their build-up really is. So this is the game against Liverpool in the league. Let's just focus on the timestamp at this point. So 7 minutes into the game, essentially we've just come away from a corner. So Manchester United are playing from left to right, and they've just defended a corner and they've managed to win the ball high up the field. They're wearing white, by the way, Liverpool in red.
I did need that.
Yeah, I thought I'd throw it out there for you. So what's happened is the ball's broken loose. Manchester United have actually managed to regain possession quite high up the pitch in this situation. But as you can see, the structure of the teams is all over the place because there's just been a corner, right? So the obvious thing to do in this scenario is to get settled possession, move the ball back towards your own goal, so you've got a little bit more space and time to do that, which is what happens. So the ball goes back to Dalot here, the wing back, and the game is sort of going to settle into now a possession phase. Now at this point you can see that Kobbie Mainoo in the middle has quite a lot of space, so the obvious thing to do is to pass to Mainoo here, and what you might think is once Mainoo receives the ball, he's going to take a positive touch towards the Liverpool goal and then look for a way of maybe advancing the ball. But this is not what happens. He receives the ball, turns away, and actually shifts the ball across the pitch to the other side. The ball actually ends up with Mazraoui, who's the wing back on the other side. So we've gone wing back to wing back via the central midfielder. Now again, you might think, well, Liverpool now got into their defensive structure now. It's obviously looking a little bit harder to break down. Maybe what's going to happen here is that Mazraoui will try and work around the side of the block and work the ball in from a more advanced position. But that is not what happens either. He actually plays the ball to the centre-backs, and the centre-backs work it from one side to the other via Maguire. And the same thing happens again then. So we have Martinez on the ball. He plays the ball down the line to the wing-back, who's Diogo Dalot, and Dalot plays the ball inside, this time to Ugarte, who's one of the other central midfielders. Now again, he's receiving the ball in space, facing down the pitch. You'd think that, oh, well, this is where you want to start getting your incisive possession of the ball. But again, actually what happens is he then shifts the ball back across to the other side, and the ball ends up back with Mazraoui. This is almost exactly the same situation structurally as the one we had 15 seconds ago.
Is there an extent to which Ruben Amorim is actually happy with this, though? As stupid as that sounds, I know it's still early in his tenure. Is he happy with the fact that they are doing this, or would he prefer them to kind of take a bit more responsibility? And going back to the initial example of Mainoo taking it and stepping forward, does he then think, okay, well, that's going to then lack control because we've maybe got someone penetrating the lines, but with loads of players behind us, if we then go for maybe more of an attacking phase, this might break down and therefore we'll lose the ball and therefore we don't have the control?
That was going to be my question as well.
Well, I mean, Man United are playing against Liverpool here, right? And this is something that Liverpool do. They are happy to possess the ball deeper in the field. Manchester City, for example, might try and squeeze their opponent really high and break down the block there. There are a lot of teams now who are sitting deeper and trying to move the ball from side to side to create incisive attacks. And yeah, maybe that's what's going to happen here. But actually, if we run the play through, we see that Mazraoui plays the ball back to De Ligt. De Ligt plays it to Maguire. Maguire steps up, plays the ball long in behind, and there's a line behind, and it just immediately goes out for a throw-in. Look at the timestamp. We're now 45 seconds beyond where we started this sequence from, and in that time, they've not really achieved anything with their build-up. So again, this is why I think that a lot of the improvements that people see are maybe a little bit aesthetic. They see, well, they've got the ball, it's comfortable possession, they've been able to move it from side to side a couple of times, therefore this is good build-up. But actually, in terms of the productivity of the build-up, in the end, all that they achieve in this 45 seconds is actually losing the ball immediately, which is maybe what a Ten Hag team in that initial situation might have just attacked directly, lost the ball, you're in the same sort of situation. Now, obviously, the benefit is that you've not had to defend for 45 seconds, but in terms of actual build-up success, I would say that what we're seeing here is the same level of productivity in the build-up, but just a very different aesthetic of how they're trying to achieve that.
Yeah, I suppose it's possession with a purpose, and the idea is to maybe circulate the ball to shift the opposition from left to right and actually try and find an opening eventually to then go and penetrate. And with the greatest of respect to the Primera Liga, against Boa Vista, that may well work if you're Sporting and you're already the more dominant side, and there's gaps that you can expose and open up. But against a Liverpool, a Chelsea, Manchester City, maybe not as much this season, but I think that the pressing structures, the structures in general out of possession, the athletic ability of these players means that they can form a really strong defensive unit. And that sort of bait that Ruben Amorim's side are trying to sort of get the opposition to play into is just not going to work to the same extent. So maybe it's just the fact that it's still a really good way of playing, but it's potentially not scalable to the elite level to be able to circulate it at the pace that they are, because the opposition that they're playing against is able to actually come back into a shape themselves.
I think that's a big key. Is it scalable up to the level that you want, right? That would be something to be concerned about longer term.
I would say just on this screenshot, before we move on, you can see that Liverpool are still in their defensive structure, and they've been able to stay in that defensive structure for 45 seconds without necessarily being broken down. And the way that Manchester United then try to expose this structure is by going in behind and being like, well, let's play the ball into the channel and see if we can get a channel runner, which again, I think against other teams with maybe lesser backline defenders might be a little bit more workable. Against Liverpool with their backline, it's going to be tough to do as well.
Okay, so what about the flip side now, John, the other way around?
Yeah, so if we look at the opposition's build-up success against Manchester United, it's the same old story. Again, we can take the build-up success percentages for each of the games here. So this time around, you want it to be lower rather than higher.
Right.
But again, we have the same sort of picture that emerges. So, for example, here we've got the Fulham game under Ten Hag, 25% opposition build-up success. If we fast forward to Fulham, there's much more build-up success this time around. So it looks like it's slightly worse here. But if we look at the Brighton and Hove Albion game, we can see that there's 40.5% build-up success, whereas earlier in the season under Ten Hag, it's 47.9. So again, what you end up starting to do is you look through all of these different fixtures, and it actually works out looking pretty similar. So again, if we take the average from those two periods, under Ten Hag, slightly better than Ruben Amorim. Again, it's about a percentage point. So the build-up success that the opponents are having is slightly higher now than it was, but there's not much in it.
I did the same when I was looking into the numbers of possession won in the attacking third between Ten Hag and Amorim, and PPDA as a measure of pressing intensity, passes per defensive action, widely spoken about before. There's, again, really nothing to choose between them. We can talk about small numbers, less than 1 per 90 minutes, but broadly converging on the same sort of thing. Maybe qualitatively different, but in the numbers, as John said at the start, there's enough now to really have a good comparison. Nothing of note, basically, is the conclusion.
I thought we were saying that they were slightly better defensively under Ruben Amorim, but this makes it seem like they're slightly worse.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what metrics you're going to use to compare them on. This is build-up success. So we're talking about the opposition starting from a build-up phase and actually progressing either to settled possession, chance creation, or actually taking a shot themselves.
So in other ways, they're marginally improved.
Yeah, I think in terms of the we saw right at the beginning, in terms of the underlying numbers, the expected goals against slightly down on where it was. And that makes sense, right? Because what we've seen with Amorim essentially is taking a player from further up the pitch and putting them into the back line. So that would make sense that your defending then improves. Opponents might be building up better against you, but you now have an extra player in that back line, which means that you probably box defending slightly better.
I was going to say, especially in the context, and I think his interview early on at Manchester United was to say that he wanted to improve the fitness of the players. We need to make sure that we're getting the best running distance and running numbers and trying to improve. You'd think that you'd see a tangible difference in the intensity from the PPDA numbers and from the possession won in the attacking third. And there's not too much in that regard as well. So the fact that they may be sitting in and having an extra body in the defence, that's fine. Maybe they are improving from that in that regard, but he wants them to be higher energy, higher intensity. We're not currently seeing anything in that regard. Maybe it's because he's trying to build things in flight and he's not actually able to get the foundational fitness levels that you need from a pre-season as well. That's, of course, where we'll maybe conclude with time will tell as to whether we actually will have that success. But in terms of the overall physical intensity, there's not too much out of possession that we can see that's different.
Now, this is all good and well, but I'm sick of this nonsense about there being no difference. I see it, John. Tell me what the difference is.
I think in the final third, we can start seeing some differences emerge between these two coaches. What I've done is I've taken the expected assists under, in this case, Erik ten Hag, and then I've worked out the percentage of that expected assist that's coming from various players. So the higher up here, the bigger the bar, basically, the more creative that player is under this manager. So under the 9 games for Erik ten Hag, we can see Fernandes, obviously the majority of creativity coming from him. That's around 17% here of the expected assists under Ten Hag coming from him.
He's good, isn't he, John?
He's a good player, yeah. And you would rely on him for that kind of thing. So that makes a ton of sense. But what I think is interesting here is around the 10% mark now, we've got about 5 players here who are contributing about the same sort of level. So Rashford, Garnacho, Eriksen, Casemiro, and Ahmad pitching in with expected assists where needed. Now, if
Dalot not far off as well, worth saying.
Yeah, Dalot up here as well, which is interesting given that he was being used as a fullback and he's now being used as a wing-back. If we fast forward to the 13 games under Ruben Amorim, I think a very different picture emerges. One is that Ahmad is now very much relied upon in terms of expected assist creation. Now, the scale here has changed. So this is now 26% of the expected assists under Amorim have come from Diallo. Fernandes is putting up about the same amount of expected assists percentage-wise. But then if we go down to this 10% mark, we can see that 4 or 5 of those players that were sort of reliable under Ten Hag have just dropped away. So we've got Garnacho there, who hasn't played as much. But then we've got Rashford, who's now left. We had Eriksen and Casemiro as well. They're not playing as much either. And as a result, what we're seeing is that the next person down from Garnacho is Lisandro Martinez, an outside centre-back. So what we're seeing under Ruben Amorim is, I think, a lack of diversity in terms of chance creation, which I think is quite interesting, because I think you could make the argument that, Amad Diallo has done quite well as a wing-back, so maybe the ability to have a player who can work well in the wing-back situation has led to him becoming an over-reliance in terms of chance creation. The argument then could be made, well, if Amorim has better players, better suited to his system, then maybe we'll start seeing this rebalancing out right now. But it does sort of raise questions about the squad and the system not really working right now. And I guess looking forward to the future, the question is whether or not Man United want to commit to a complete rebuild where they're taking players from the previous generation who I think were fitting and working relatively well within a different system, to this new Amorim system where you're going to have to bring in completely different profiles, and that's going to take time, it's going to take energy, it's going to take money, and more importantly, it's moving you away from the sort of profiles you have now and sort of committing you to a tactical trajectory that it's going to impact you in the long run.
Well, interesting that you should say that about the players there, John. And let me tell you, we're going to play a very fun game related to that just after we hear from Phil Hay. Tell me something interesting, Phil.
Points deductions were the talk of the Premier League last season. But even as profit and sustainability rules hit hard, we never saw anything as wild as a team on minus 68 points. That's the state of play in Romania's second division, where poor old CS Mioveni are having a time of it. They've got a history of failing to pay wages, and since the start of December, they've been hit by 7 different sanctions from the Romanian authorities, amounting to a deduction of 74 points. That's why they're bottom of the table with minus 68, and that's why they're already relegated. The Romanian season's in the middle of its winter break, but it's due to start in a couple of weeks' time. Journalists there don't think CS Mioveni will turn up for the next game. Let's see. We brought you this story in the Athletic FC newsletter. If you'd like to sign up and receive it Monday to Friday, click on the link below.
Hey, thanks, Phil. Now, one of the common criticisms of Manchester United is that they suck, or that the players suck. It seems a little unfair. But today, in a rather crude way, I should say, we're going to find out. Because we're going to play a game I've decided to call Which Players from Other Non-Elite Teams Would Be Preferably Chosen Above Manchester United's First 11 Players? The game that proves nothing, but says everything. Now, here's how the game works, okay? We've got Manchester United's most commonly used First 11 from who scored. We're going to go through it position by position, and then we're going to spin an exciting wheel, and it's going to land on a different non-elite team from the Premier League. We've left the elite teams out. Spurs are still in there, and we've got rid of the 3 promoted teams as well who are about to get relegated. So if we're starting with Onana, John, I'm going to ask you to spin the wheel now and tell me, when it lands on a team, do you keep Onana or do you take a player from this team to play in that position? The team is Brentford. Who's Brentford's goalkeeper?
Mark Flecken.
Do you want Mark Flecken or are we keeping Onana?
I mean, I'm going to keep Onana, I think.
Sure.
Not much between them this season, I'd say.
Flecken, a good shot stopper. Okay with the ball, but Onana, pretty good with the ball.
Wouldn't be an upgrade.
These TikTok formats are harder than they appear. Next up, we're going to do 3 centre-backs. We'll start at the left, Lisandro Martinez. And we're talking about Brighton. So would we take a Brighton centre-back to replace Lisandro Martinez?
We're talking Lewis Dunk, I guess.
Yeah, in possession, Martinez is arguably stronger. This is such a weird game because we're going to say stick with the players despite everything that we've said.
Doesn't matter, that's fine.
I'd say stick
It's a close one, isn't it?
I'd say stick with Martinez.
Yeah?
I'd stick with Martinez.
Okay, next time say it quicker, okay? I want you to both be quicker about this.
Just the name is all you want.
Yeah, I want yes or no.
Okay.
Harry Maguire now, central centre-back. Would we swap out Harry Maguire for a player from Fulham?
No.
No, because
Well,
I
they-
would play Anderson as a right-sided centre-back in that back three.
My game isn't working. Okay, let's try Matthias de Ligt now at right centre-back. And that's going to be from Crystal Palace.
Who's the right-sided centre-back for
Well,
Crystal
you
Palace?
tell me.
Chris Richards. Or Maxence Lacroix.
Every time we tried this before, it worked. Okay, we're keeping de Ligt.
Let's say look.
No, we're keeping de Ligt. We're play by the honour of the game. Now we're going to wing backs now. Full backs will accept a left back or a left wing back from, please, Wolverhampton Wanderers.
Ait Nouri, I'd have.
Ait
I'd
Nouri?
take Ait Nouri.
We're thank the Lord. Okay, and then we'll do the other wing back. So in place of Mazraoui, we would like to select a player, please, from Newcastle.
I'd take Livramento.
Over Mazraoui.
He's got more energy to go up and down, I'd argue.
But yeah, I don't think it's based on anything other than tactical fit rather than like ability.
Well, the game's a stupid game, so it doesn't have to be.
I'm trying to play in the spirit of the game.
You're trying to make it so it works for Joe. I'll go with Livramento.
Yeah,
just to make it easy.
Okay, and now we've got the 2 central midfielders. Okay, we'll start with Ugarte's position, and we'll be picking that player from Spurs.
I mean, which Spurs midfielder?
Victor Wanyama. Is he still there?
Yves Bissouma, maybe?
Yves Bissouma,
I guess it would be
Bentancur.
Basuma.
No, it could be Pat Matasar.
You take any of these
I mean,
players.
I'd maybe go Sarr over Ugarte.
Yeah? Yeah?
Yeah, go with that.
Oh, it's working better now. Okay, fine. Kobbie Mainoo's next, and what we're looking for is a player from Everton. Would you replace Kobbie Mainoo with a player from Everton? The answer is no. Let's move on. Okay. Now, Amad Diallo's position. I assume this one might be a little bit harder, but we will be choosing from Aston Villa. Maybe it isn't. I mean, is it Leon Bailey we're talking about here?
Yeah.
On that side,
Asensio now, sort of.
Marcus Rashford?
No, I wouldn't change anything there.
No. Okay, fine. Okay, next up is Bruno Fernandes, who's in the left 10 position in our team. Going to be a little tricky to replace him with anyone, but the team that's come up is Bournemouth, John.
I mean, Bruno Fernandes is an incredible player, so I'm going to keep him. But
Sure.
you know,
Justin Kluivert, though.
yeah, you could
Season
use
recovery.
Cliver, you could use Semenyo, I suppose. They're both good options, but I still think Fernandes is better.
Next up is Rasmus Højlund in the striker position, and we have Nottingham Forest. I assume that's Chris Wood. What are you doing here?
I'm keeping Højlund because Chris Wood's more of he's not as mobile. You want somebody who's going to be able to run in behind, and Chris Wood just isn't that profile of player. I would keep Højlund for this one.
I feel like there's a lot weighing on me here. I would also probably keep Højlund. I think that's a controversial position, though. Obviously, Chris Wood has had an incredible season, but
Yeah.
again,
I'm
tactics.
taking Chris Wood,
Yeah, okay, you can do that.
but I understand why you would keep Højlund.
If I'm contractually obliged to take Chris Wood, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. Now, listen, I'm aware that my game has failed. But you get the point, right? In most instances, it's worth saying, we did this in rehearsal twice, and both times there were way more changes than that. But the point we're making here is that it's a toss-up, right? You know, like when you compare Manchester United, not against the elite teams, but when you compare Manchester United against the teams that are actually around them in the Premier League at the moment, you really can see, I mean, not from our example, but you really can see that the squad strength is just not what it once was. I mean, it's a million miles away from what it once was.
I think the fact that there was even like debates about a few of those positions shows you how far off Man United are from the very top. And I think if we'd have taken the best of the non-elite teams and made a best 11, that team would probably look like they would beat Manchester United most of the time. Whereas I think if you compared that to maybe an Arsenal or a Liverpool, you'd say you'd still have the elite team as the favourite there. So yeah, there's definitely some sort of squad impact here that we're talking about.
It's worth noting as well that we're talking about potential incomings and how you maybe replace them. Obviously, this is for the purpose of the game, but Manchester United aren't very cash rich at the moment, and if they were to bring in more players, they obviously have to be quite smart about it and maybe trying to get more value in the market, which they haven't done historically at all. And B, they'd have to sell players to do so, and also try and get a good return on that sale as well, which they haven't proven to be successful in recent years on that either. So of course it's very easy to talk about incomings and replacements that are needed, but in reality, outside of the fun spinning wheel game, it's going to be very difficult to actually do that in the next couple of windows without a big outlay of money.
Yeah, okay. So we've seen that there are some very minor differences between Erik ten Hag and Ruben Amorim. We've also proved with our game that the Manchester United squad is of a relatively low value. What does this mean though in terms of how much we can put at Ruben Amorim's door? Because the problem, as always, has felt bigger than the manager. However, you might have wanted some more change since he came in.
Yeah, I mean, Mark's got this nice viz that you might want to talk us through in terms of showing that this isn't just a Ruben Amorim problem. This is a problem that's been happening for a little while at Manchester United.
Yeah, so I basically looked at their club ELO rating, and I won't go into too much depth on this, but it's essentially just a measure of team strength over time. And I did it just starting from just at the end of the Ferguson era and reign, and looked to see just how much it does fluctuate up and down across each of the managers that they've tried and failed with. And I actually just updated this morning from a previous visualization I did looking at the end of Erik ten Hag's reign to see just how much you can see the sort of the downward turn there. And you didn't really have too much of an uptick other than in the, let's say, early months, probably around the time that they were fighting for trophies, won the FA Cup, etc. But normally you'd see a bit of an uptick from a manager in the early months, a manager bounce, if you like, and we just haven't really seen that with Amorim. And I don't know if that's just simply because it's mid-season and there's just so many games to play, and a lot of his sort of tactical approach is having to maybe do walkthroughs on the training pitch and meetings, and not able to really spend as much time on the training pitch. He said as much, but it just shows how damning it is across a longer period, going back over a decade now, and B, how you'd expect to see just a little bit of an uptick. And we haven't seen that from Amorim. It's also worth noting as well that I looked at this for Sporting in the time that he was there, before and after, and he had a similar sort of period where it took a further downturn before it then had an uptick. So you maybe think, and you would suspect, that it must get better in the coming months.
It's like when you catch a heavy rock in one hand, Mark. The rock doesn't simply stop. Yeah, your hand goes down
Before
and then back up when you throw the rock back at the face of the person who threw it at you.
Amorim's got the rock.
What this chart proves to me, though, really, is that maybe Mourinho is the GOAT. Is that what you're trying to show?
I think that's what I should have put on the title instead of
Yeah.
the long-winded way of me saying it. Yeah.
Goatinho. The other thing you've talked about recently, Mark Carey, has been Manchester United's data recruitment department. And I think if we ask you a little bit about this, it might reveal that some of these problems are just much broader than the manager at Manchester United.
Yeah, well, I helped with a piece with Mark Critchley. I did some investigative journalism for a change.
The two Marks.
MC squared is what we like to call it. Yeah. So we're basically looking at the data department at Manchester United, and it was back in December now, it was after Sir Jim Ratcliffe said, I think it was in a fanzine, United We Stand, saying that the data department is essentially still living in last century in terms of the data analysis. So we actually looked to try and unpick what he meant by that and whether it was actually the case. And I do think it's worth noting that they do have some really smart people within the club, and they've built a really strong data team, people who are very intelligent and very good at what they do from an analyst and data scientist, data engineer perspective. But there's a few kind of key things that we thought we'd unpick from it. And the first is that they only made their first data hire in late 2021, and that was Dominic Jordan, who was the head of data science there. And first and foremost, that's quite worthy of flagging, because you compare that to a Liverpool and a Manchester City, the sort of elite clubs that Manchester United are comparing themselves with. And they've had data departments and data teams for a decade or more, and have built these really strong models and use it as such a key part of their recruitment as well. Now we're talking in the past 5 years that Manchester United have had their first hire, and then it obviously takes years to build all the models that go into that and actually inform what you'll then see on the pitch. So that's the first thing. The second is that there's been, much like the club in general, there's been a lot of upheaval within the data department as well. So Dominic Jordan has actually since left the club. Last summer, the first hire. There's been multiple really good hires since then, and they've built the team, as I mentioned, but he has now left. And I think some of the team maybe don't know exactly who they're reporting to quite in the same way. It just shows that there's a bit of disruption within the data department itself, and how much then it's translating from what they're doing and the great work that they're doing onto the pitch, and actually having that alignment from the data department to the coaching staff. So again, you compare that to a Brentford and a Brighton, two teams who are held up as the gold standard of using data. What they have is not only good models, but they have that alignment from the people who are doing all the incredible scientific work, and then what you actually have to inform the recruitment and what you see on the pitch. And it seems like there's, much like a lot of the club, there's that disconnect there. So that was what was quite revealing from Mark's myself investigation and Mark Critchley's investigation as well.
That's very interesting, and this is all very useful context. It doesn't, though, help me understand how to judge Ruben Amorim, because all I see is him in the middle of this sort of confusing context.
Haven't we fallen into the same old trap that we always fall into with Manchester United, in sort of holding up the manager as the exemplar of whether or not it's working or not? I think the big problem, and we've talked about this at length so much over the last few years, whenever Manchester United move a manager on, they bring another manager in who does things in a completely different way. There's no continuity between those managers. And when Ineos came in, we had lots of conversations about what they needed to do now was to have this coherence. Alignment is the word that Mark used. I think that's really important, because if you're going to have continuity, which is what Manchester United want, you need continuity to become a big dynastic elite side. You can either do that by throwing in a manager and hoping that he sorts everything out in the way that Ferguson did, but if it doesn't work out, then you're just constantly churning through your managers. So what I think we should be talking about with Manchester United is finding that continuity elsewhere. We talked about director of football a lot. We've said the easiest way to achieve that alignment is to have one person who is going to stay the 10 years, is going to be able to input and influence that vision about what the club is going to look like on and off the pitch. And then you can hire a manager who you think can enact that vision on the pitch. You bring in players who can fit that vision on the pitch. You bring in recruitment staff who are going to be able to recruit those kind of players. And then what you've got is, across the whole of the club, this like long-term vision that you can work towards.
A communal vision.
A communal vision. And interestingly enough, the person that we expected to do that was Dan Ashworth, who Man United went out of their way to get hold of.
They spent a lot of money on
it. A lot of money. He was brought in 5 months later, they let him go. And so, again, what we've done is we've gone from this picture of, managers are going to solve the problem to, now we've got longevity through the director of football. He's now gone. We're back to the manager being like, well, is this manager going to fix everything? And I think it's unfair to expect a couple of things from Ruben Amorim. One is to fix the problems mid-season. We've seen that that's not going to happen. And the suggestion is that from all the data we've seen today, being very similar to what it was under Ten Hag, probably a lot of that is out of his hands at this point in time. But in the long run, again, if it doesn't work out with Ruben Amorim and they do make all of these decisions about, building a squad for a back three, a different system, etc., spending all that money, Mark's talked about how that's going to be difficult for them because they're not cash rich at the moment. If it does go wrong, we're just going to probably fall back and say it's Ruben Amorim's fault, when I think that the bigger problem is the lack of continuity across the big picture stuff. So I'm fed up of talking about Man United managers.
No, it's true. And it's not as if they've not got examples in recent years of it working, between that alignment from a sporting director and a manager who's also staying in his role for more than a couple of years as well. You think of Edu and Mikel Arteta. I know Edu's no longer at the club, but the point still remains. Michael Edwards and Jurgen Klopp. They've got examples staring them in the face of successful clubs doing the right thing and having the right processes. I know that each club has a different case, and there's a whole web of different sort of contextual factors within that. But I still think that if they're going to look to try and get to the gold standard, they do need to start to operate in a similar way to what the gold standard clubs are doing themselves. So there's still a long way to go, I think.
Okay, so the structure isn't there, but just hypothetically, if it was there, is Ruben Amorim either way the right coach to appoint? Because he's fairly unique.
Yeah, and I think the uniqueness brings with it a level of risk, right? And the risk is balanced by a reward. I think the idea is that for Manchester United, they recognised if they're going to try and get a manager to fix things, they should get an up-and-coming manager from a smaller market who has, the charisma and the ability to turn a club around. We've seen that Ruben Amorim can do that with Sporting. However, the reward that would bring is balanced by that risk that, he's a young coach. There's questions about scalability. There's questions about whether or not the system that he plays can actually scale up to the elite level as well.
And there were relatively few other elite managers playing that system, right? So if he weren't to work out, but that was the game model that the club decided on, who are they then bringing in to replace him?
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about with continuity before, right? If you're going down that route, you always have to think 2 or 3 managers ahead. And if you build a squad for a back three with wing backs in it, then you're massively reducing the sort of talent pool of managers that you can then bring in after that. Now, it might be the case that we start seeing more elite clubs moving towards back three systems in the future. I don't know. But again, that's a risk factor that is going to have to be taken into account. So, yeah, I think what they've done is they've gone maybe high risk, high reward. And maybe at this point in their history, what they actually need is a low risk, sort of medium reward kind of manager who can get them on a pathway towards success rather than. I think they tried that one.
They did try that one. Okay, final question. How do I judge Amorim?
I don't know. I think it's really tough to expect him to have turned this team around in the space of time that he's had in the middle of a season.
I mean, despite us saying that we've got enough of a sample now, enough to kind of look at the data, I do still think a full pre-season and a full season to actually judge him and all the players that he may well recruit as well. It's a cliche, but it's true. He needs more of another transfer window to be able to actually instill his ideas and the players that he wants. I think if we have this conversation in about 18 months' time, I'll give you a proper answer.
But that's a risk as well, right? Because you're saying they need a full transfer window. We're talking about having to bring in completely different profiles of players and not having necessarily the funds to be able to do that. So that's what it is for me. It's like all of this is just balancing off risk in a way that I think isn't necessarily justified in terms of the big picture.
Yeah, and hopefully getting more out of the players that he does have at his disposal if they're not going to go.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.